Up to this point, our programs have been very sequential in flow. They went from one step to the other unconditionally. But sometimes the logic of our program shouldn't follow an unconditional route. Sometimes we need to make decisions or have some alternative action based on a value that we've received from our user or that comes from our program. When it's reduced to the basic form, all computer decisions are yes or no values. In Java, if you want to take action based on a yes or no value, you use an if statement. Suppose that you had an integer variable named score, and you want to display a message that when the value of the score is 10, it says you achieved a perfect score. The if statement will help us make that decision whether to produce the output of you achieved a perfect score or nothing. An if statement begins with the keyword if, and it follows by opening and closing brackets. Inside these opening and closing brackets will be our condition that we want to check. This if statement says if the score is equal to 10, then we're going to do something. The something that we're going to do will appear between two curly brackets. In Eclipse, whenever you put the opening curly bracket, you'll notice that it tried to autocomplete and put in the second curly bracket for me. So inside those two curly brackets is where I'm going to put my output statement. Now the program flow will prompt the user for the score that they achieved on their exam. We'll grab that score into the variable score, and we'll check to see if that score is equal to 10, it will say you achieved a perfect score. Let's see it run. When score is equal to 10, the message will print out, but if score does not equal 10, the message will not print out. Within these parentheses, you can place any kind of statement that will evaluate to a yes or no, or what we more commonly know it as a Boolean expression. Most often you use a comparison that includes one of the relational operators that you learned about earlier in our course, like the double equals. That means that it is equal to that value, the greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, or even the not. You can use any expression that evaluates as true or false, such as a simple Boolean variable, or you can even call a method that returns a Boolean value, which we'll do in a few weeks. One of the common errors that I see with if statements as you start creating them is students will often put a semicolon at the end after the condition. And there is no semicolon at the end of the first line of an if statement because the statement does not end there. The statement ends after the curly bracket. You could type the whole if statement on one line and it would execute correctly. However, as you saw whenever I first started to create this if statement, Eclipse, after I put in the opening curly bracket, automatically indented in the part that occurs once the condition is met, and it put the closing curly bracket on the same level as the start of the if statement. This is for organization pieces so that you can see what code is being executed inside the specific pieces of the if statement. Code that executes if the if statement is true does have a semicolon at the end of it. So you'll have to pay very close attention. The if statement itself, no semicolon, but the statements that occur, depending on if the condition is met, does have a semicolon. Another error I'll sometimes see students have as they begin working with if statements is to use the assignment operator instead of the equivalency operator. The double equal sign checks to see if the value is equal to. And if you'll remember from creating our variables, a single equal sign means that it's an assignment. So in this statement, we would be actually assigning score to B10. When the expression score equals 10 is used in an if statement, the assignment is illegal because only Boolean expressions are allowed inside of our if statement conditions. Another alternative to using a Boolean expression in an if statement, such as score equal 10, is to store the Boolean's expression's value in a Boolean variable. For example, is perfect score is a Boolean variable that stores the true or false from evaluating whether score is equal to 10. Then we can plug in this Boolean variable is perfect score that will either evaluate to true or false inside our condition statement for our if statement. So now if we run this again, we'll see that if I put in a 10, it's storing that score is equal to 10 true inside of this Boolean statement. Is perfect score is true, it is executing what's inside of this if statement. In Java, the if-else statement provides a mechanism to perform one action when a Boolean expression evaluates as true and a different action when a Boolean expression evaluates to false. For example, we'd want to use an if-else statement if we wanted to display one message when the score is 10 and a different message when it's not. We create an if-else statement by putting in our if statement followed by our curly brackets, and we use the keyword else with opening and curly brackets. This if-else statement says, if the score is perfect, we're going to print out you achieved a perfect score. But if the score is not perfect, then we'll print out another message. When you execute an else if statement, the action that takes place depends on the evaluation of the Boolean expression. When we're working with if statements, we want to be careful to avoid using magic numbers. One way you can avoid using magic numbers in your if statements are to pull out the values and to create final variables for them. Then, in place where the magic number is, you use the variable name instead. This will allow our program to be easily changed in the event that a perfect score becomes a 15 or even a 20. Now the programmer can look right up here at the top, see what the perfect score variable is, and place in the new value for the perfect score. If we left it the other way with the 10 displaying, a developer might have to guess what the 10 means. So avoid magic numbers while you're working with your if statements too. Pull those out and make them variables, and then use the variables in your. Let's take a look at if statements with strings. In this next program, we're going to capture a name and we're going to check to see if it's Bob. And if it's Bob, we'll return a message based on if the name is Bob. And if it's not Bob, we'll return a different message. So to begin with, I'm going to type my keyword if, and then I'm going to type in my condition. When we're dealing with strings and conditions, it can get a little confusing with the parentheses. So in this case, if name.equals, which is the name of our string method that we use to compare to see if a string is the same, around that equals we put the value in there that we want to compare against. So you'll have opening and closing brackets around the condition that you want to check to see if it's equal, and then you also have additional parentheses around the whole condition. If our statement evaluates to true, we'll print out what about Bob. Otherwise, we'll print out a different statement. Again, I want to point out that there are only semicolons on the statements that execute inside of the conditions. There are no semicolons at the end of any of the if statement blocks or at the end of any of these conditions. So now when I run this, we'll type in a name, and because it equals Bob, it will display the message inside of the true condition. And if it's false, this will evaluate to false, so it will come down here and run what's inside the else. Now with our strings, we have a couple cool methods that we can use. Equal is going to check to make sure that the message is the same. So what about Bob? If I type in Bob uppercase, it's going to say that there's no Bobs here. Character for character, B-O-B all lowercase is different from capital B-O-B. But there is a method that we can use called equals ignore case. And this method will ignore the capitalization and just compare to see if the value character for character is the same. The important thing to remember is if you're using strings, you must use a string method to find out if the values are the same. If you're using a double equal sign, you'll be using numbers to evaluate. So pay close attention to that. If I use a double equal sign when I'm trying to use a string method, because of object reference, they will show as not being equal. So it will look and see where they are located in the memory and see if those are the same spot. And if they're not, they will return a false. and in this case, they're not located in the same place. So in order to avoid that confusion, whenever you're working with strings, you're going to use string methods, and whenever you're working with numbers, you're going to use your standard comparison signs. Again, use Eclipse all that you can so that it will automatically put in your closing curly bracket. It will help you with formatting as well as you get started working with your if statements.